The sound-filling room 208 was supposed to be soothing, a testament to life persisting against all odds. The constant rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, the soft, mechanized breath of the ventilator, the low hum of the equipment that had kept John alive for a decade. But that morning, a new sound ripped through the sterile tranquility of the room, a contained gasp, followed by a short, desperate breath. "Doctor, I think I'm going to be sick." Nurse Jessica's voice was a trembling whisper. Dr. Michael Evans lifted his eyes from his clipboard, and his gaze, trained to diagnose diseases in seconds, captured the scene with alarming clarity. Jessica was pale, a thin sheen of sweat glistening on her forehead under the cold, impersonal hospital light. Her hand flew to her mouth, and her eyes widened with a mix of panic and shame. On an impulse, she turned and ran out of the room, her footsteps echoing down the polished corridor of St. Jude Memorial Hospital in Chicago. Dr. Evans remained motionless. His heart, usually calm under the pressure of complex surgeries and difficult diagnoses, beat with an uncomfortable force against his ribs. It wasn't the first time. An icy chill ran down his spine, a feeling that had nothing to do with the controlled temperature of the hospital. It was the sensation of déjà vu, a terrible and impossible pattern repeating itself before his eyes. His gaze moved slowly from the empty doorway to the figure lying in the bed. John, the ghost patient. In a deep coma for 10 years, ever since a terrible accident. But his body defied all medical logic. Where there should have been atrophy and frailty, there were defined muscles, healthy toned skin, and a physique that seemed to belong to an athlete at rest, not a man kept alive by machines. It was the first mystery of room 208. But the second, what was happening now, was infinitely more disturbing. "My God, let it not be what I'm thinking," Evans murmured to himself, his voice almost inaudible above the hum of the machines. Minutes later, Jessica returned, her composure partially restored, but the pallor still clinging to her face. "I'm sorry, doctor. It was just dizziness, a bad bout of nausea. I'm better now." Evans stared at her, his penetrating blue eyes searching for something beyond her words. "Jessica, I've noticed you like this for days. Dizziness, nausea. As your chief of medicine, I need to examine you." "It's nothing, doctor, I swear. It's just stress, personal problems," she insisted, her voice carrying a plea that made him even more suspicious. Evans's tone dropped, becoming graver, denser. "The thing is, Jessica, it looks like I'm seeing the same story repeat itself. The same thing that happened with Sarah. And before her, with Chloe. All the nurses I assigned to care for the patient in room 208. The words hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Jessica's face lost the last shred of color. She knew exactly what he was implying. The secret that Sarah and Chloe were keeping, now visible in their growing bellies beneath their uniforms. Are you saying that I'm pregnant?" Her voice broke on the last word. The silence in Evans's office minutes later was deafening. The small rapid test device was on his desk between them, processing a drop of blood and Jessica's fate. Evans watched the blank screen, but his mind was miles away, connecting the dots of an impossible puzzle. 3 young, healthy, and, more importantly, single nurses, all with no known relationships, and all, after spending months caring for the same comatose patient, presented the same symptoms, the same terrified denial, and finally, the same unbelievable truth. The sharp beep of the device brought him back to reality. The result was ready. His eyes fixed on the small screen, and the air seemed to be stolen from his lungs. He didn't need to say anything. Slowly, he turned the display towards Jessica. Positive. A sob escaped the young nurse's lips. "No, it can't be. I can't be pregnant. There's no way." Evans stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. He approached her, not as a boss, but as a man confronting the abyss of the unknown. His eyes fixed on hers, and his voice was a mixture of authority and an almost feverish perplexity. "Jessica, you are the third nurse to become pregnant in this hospital without any logical explanation. The only thing you 3 have in common is that room. That man, So tell me the truth, what in God's name is happening in room 208 when I'm not looking? The echo of Jessica's despair still lingered in the office. Doctor, Evans stared at the positive pregnancy test on his desk as if it were a piece of evidence from an impossible crime. The door closed with a soft click, and he was left alone, surrounded by his diplomas, his medical books, and a truth that defied every page he had ever read. Logic, the pillar of his existence, was disintegrating. 3 nurses, 3 inexplicable pregnancies, and at the center of it all, the silent enigma of room 208. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the exhaustion of sleepless nights take hold of him. The hospital administration would never believe his suspicions. They would call him crazy, suggest stress, or worse, invent a scandal to cover up the case. No. If he wanted the truth, he would have to find it himself outside of protocols, in the shadows of the corridors he knew so well. From that moment on, he was not just a doctor. He was an investigator, and his first witness was Chief Nurse Sarah. Sarah, the first to feel ill, the first to announce a miraculous pregnancy. She was ground zero for that mystery. Evans knew that a direct approach would be useless. She was defensive, protecting a secret with the same ferocity as a lioness protecting her cubs. He needed to be subtle. The next day he found her in the break room, the smell of fresh coffee hanging in the air. Sarah's belly, nearly 6 months along, was a prominent, constant presence. Evans poured a cup, the steam warming his face, and leaned against the counter beside her, forcing an air of casualness. "Sarah," he began, his tone light, "I was reviewing some old files and came across John's transfer from room 208. I remember you coordinated the whole process, didn't you? Impeccable work, as always." He watched her out of the corner of his eye. A muscle twitched in her jaw. She took a sip of her tea, a little too quickly. "Oh yes, Doctor. I vaguely remember. It was a long time ago. It was a complicated case." "It certainly was," Evans continued, his eyes fixed on the dark liquid in his cup. "So complicated that Dr. Eleanor Vance's signature from the originating hospital looks a bit different on the transfer forms, almost as if she were in a hurry." The silence that followed was almost palpable. Sarah's cup trembled slightly in her hands, producing a gentle clinking sound against the saucer. She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Doctors and their terrible handwriting, right? You know how it is." She stood up abruptly. "If you'll excuse me, Doctor, I need to check a patient's medication." She left the room, leaving Evans alone with the certainty throbbing in his veins. She was lying. The tremor, the flight, the fake smile. They were all the pieces he needed to confirm. The trail of lies began in John's transfer papers. If this story has touched you so far, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. From that moment on, Evans changed his routine. He became a shadow. He observed the interactions between Sarah, Chloe, and the now terrified Jessica. He noticed the quick glances exchanged in the corridors, the whispered meetings near the lockers, the coffee breaks that turned into secret gatherings. They were connected by something much bigger than a simple coincidence, a sisterhood forged in fear. He needed more. He needed to get outside the hospital grounds. The answer wasn't in the medical records, but in the life Sarah led outside those walls. He started monitoring her schedules, her days off, her patterns. For 2 weeks, nothing. Her routine was monotonous, from hospital to home, from home to the supermarket. It seemed like a dead end, until that Tuesday. A persistent fine rain was falling over Chicago, turning the city lights into colored smears on the wet asphalt. Evans was finishing his shift when he saw Sarah leaving in a hurry. She wasn't using her usual car. Instead, she got into an anonymous, dark-colored sedan parked at the end of the street. His heart quickened. This was different. This was a break in the pattern. Without a second thought, he ran to his own car in the parking lot. He kept a safe distance, a string of red brake lights separating him from his target. He didn't know where he was going, or what he expected to find. He only knew that this was the first real loose end he had found in months. The dark sedan left the busy city avenues behind, entering a highway that stretched into rural Illinois. The city lights gave way to an almost complete darkness. broken only by the car's headlights and the incessant rain. Evans felt the adrenaline pumping through his body, the same rush he felt before a high-risk surgery. He was in unknown territory. After nearly an hour, Sarah's car finally exited the highway, turning onto a narrow, winding dirt road, flanked by dense trees that looked like skeletal claws in the darkness. The rain was turning the road into a muddy mess, and Evans had to concentrate to avoid losing control of his car. Finally, in a clearing, he saw the sedan's taillights go out. There was a house there, an old, isolated country house with a single yellow light glowing in the porch window. Evans turned off his headlights and stopped his car further back on the road, hidden by the curtain of rain and darkness. His heart hammered against his chest. He saw Sarah's silhouette get out of the car and run towards the house. The door opened before she even reached it, as if someone were waiting for her. She went inside and the door closed, locking the secret within. He stayed there, in the silence of his car, the only sound being the raindrops hitting the metal roof. What the hell was a pregnant chief nurse doing in an isolated house in the middle of nowhere on a stormy night? The answer, he felt with an appalling certainty, was inside, and he needed to find it. The car engine cooled in silence, softly ticking in the rainy night. Inside, Dr. Evans was a statue of tension, his knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel. Every rational instinct screamed at him to call the police, to report the location and let the authorities take over. But what would he say? I followed one of my pregnant nurses to a country house because I have an impossible theory about a comatose patient. They would dismiss him as an exhausted man on the verge of a nervous breakdown. No, he needed proof, something concrete, irrefutable. He needed to see with his own eyes. With a decisive movement, he turned off his cell phone to avoid any accidental sound or light and opened the car door with infinite care. The cold, damp night air instantly enveloped him, and the fine rain began to soak his overcoat. Each step in the mud was a loud, sticky sound in his ears. He moved in a crouch, using the shadows of the trees for cover, his heart beating a frantic rhythm against the night's silence. The house seemed larger up close, old wooden with the rustic charm of a place that held stories. He circled the structure, passing a dark porch until he found what he was looking for. A side window, whose muslin curtain was slightly ajar, letting a sliver of warm, golden light escape. The scene inside was one of disconcerting domesticity. Sarah was sitting on a worn sofa, laughing at something someone had said. Next to her, Chloe was also smiling, and in a nearby armchair, even Jessica looked relaxed, the panic of days before replaced by a familiar comfort. The sight of the three of them together, complicit, confirmed the depth of the conspiracy. But it wasn't their presence that made Evans's blood run cold. It was the presence of the others. There were two men in the room. One of them, with his back to the window, was standing near the fireplace. His build, the shape of his shoulders, his dark hair. It was identical to John. For an instant of pure confusion, Evans's mind tried to process the impossible. Had he woken up? Had they kidnapped him from the hospital? But then the man near the fireplace turned to pick up a glass from the small table, and Evans saw his face clearly. They were John's features, without a doubt. But his eyes were alive, alert, shining with amusement. He wasn't a man in a coma. He was vibrant, healthy, and talkative. "You can't keep eating all the ice cream, Arthur," Sarah said, laughing. "Ben will be furious when he arrives." Arthur, the man Evans thought was John, shrugged. Then he should get here faster. Lying in that hospital bed works up an appetite. Evans's mind was spinning. Arthur, Ben, who were these people? It was then that the door to one of the bedrooms opened, and the second man entered the room, drying his hands with a towel. Evans held his breath, feeling a vertigo take hold of him. The second man was a mirror image of the first, the same face, the same height, the same athletic body. Twins. They were identical to John. The mystery of the body that didn't atrophy suddenly found a bizarre but plausible explanation. Were they taking turns? But the truth was even more complex, more shocking than he could have imagined. Arthur stretched, yawning. "I'm exhausted. This charade is wearing me out." When is John going to relieve me so I can finally have a decent night's sleep in a real bed? Jessica replied, her voice calm. He's getting ready, Arthur. He'll take the shift soon. You know we need to keep the exact rotation so the muscles don't change appearance. A knot formed in Evans's throat. They weren't twins. The math in his head refused to work, but the conversation was crystal clear. Arthur was here. Ben was on his way. And John, the official patient in room 208, was also involved, about to relieve his brother. There were 3 of them, identical triplets. The reality hit him like a violent wave. There was no medical mystery. There was no miracle or anomaly. There was a fraud, an elaborate, dangerous, and brilliantly executed deception. The man in room 208 was not a comatose patient. It was a vacancy, filled in shifts by 3 identical men, while 3 pregnant nurses guarded their secret. The whole picture clicked into place with a terrifying clarity. He needed to get out of there. He backed away from the window, his movements stiff, robotic. He left and got back to his car. That's when a sound cut through the night, louder than the rain, sharper than the wind. The creak of the front door of the house opening. Panic, cold and electric, shot down Evans's spine. He threw himself against the side wall of the house, pressing himself flat into the damp darkness, the smell of wet wood and earth filling his nostrils. He held his breath, his heart hammering so loudly he feared they could hear it. The sliver of light from the door widened, projecting a yellow rectangle onto the mud. A silhouette appeared, one of the brothers. He stood there for a moment, stretching and looking out into the dark night, as if enjoying the fresh air. Evans was mere feet away, hunched in the shadows, one step from being discovered. To the doctor, that instant felt like an eternity. Finally, the man yawned, went back inside, and the door closed, plunging the world back into darkness. Evans didn't wait for a second invitation. In a quick, silent movement, he sprinted back to the road, the mud trying to trap his shoes with every step. He reached his car, jumped in, and turned the key, the sound of the engine seeming like thunder in that stillness. Without turning on his headlights, he maneuvered the car and sped down the dirt road, only allowing himself to breathe deeply when the highway lights appeared on the horizon. The drive back to Chicago was a blur. The rain lashed the windshield, and the wipers moved in a hypnotic rhythm. But Evans' mind was back in that living room. The scene repeated itself in an infinite loop. The identical faces, the casual conversation about taking turns in a hospital bed, the pregnant nurses acting as guardians of a monumental farce. The initial anger gave way to a more complex feeling. It was a mixture of fury at the professional betrayal and, against his will, a reluctant awe at the audacity of the plan. They had created a perfect illusion. But why? The question echoed in his mind with every mile. A fraud of this magnitude wasn't to avoid boredom or earn a hospital salary. It was to hide something big, something worth the risk of ruining 6 lives. And the 3 babies on the way. The situation was an ethical and moral nightmare. He arrived at his apartment in the heart of Chicago just before dawn. The city was still sleeping, but for him, sleep was impossible. He paced his living room, the silhouettes of the skyscrapers like silent sentinels outside. Calling the police was still an option, the easiest one. But the consequences would be catastrophic. A scandal of this magnitude would not only destroy the reputation of St. Jude Memorial, a hospital to which he had dedicated his life, but also send the 3 nurses and the 3 brothers to jail for years, leaving 3 children to be born into a world of chaos. No, he wouldn't be the executioner. But he couldn't be an accomplice either. He needed the full truth. He needed to understand the why. And for that, he needed to regain control. The secret investigation was over. It was time for confrontation. The next morning at the hospital, Dr. Evans was no longer the confused, haunted man of the last few months. There was a new authority in his posture, a cold calm in his eyes that made the interns step back. He walked to the nursing station, where he found Jessica organizing charts, her hands visibly trembling. "Nurse Jessica," he said, his voice firm and professional. "Call Chief Nurse Sarah and Nurse Chloe. Meet me in room 208 in 5 minutes. Emergency consult." The panic in Jessica's eyes was instantaneous, but she merely nodded, unable to form a word. Evans saw her hurry to find the others. He saw the sidelong glances, the heads together in a frantic whisper. The bait had been cast. 5 minutes later, he was standing outside the door to room 208. The three women approached, their expressions a poorly made mask of professionalism over their growing fear. "Doctor," Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Has something happened to John?" Evans stared at her, his gaze passing over each of them. "I'm concerned about an anomalous neurological activity I detected. I will perform a deep brain mapping procedure. Now. And I want my primary care team present to observe and learn." It was an undeniable order, wrapped in impeccable medical jargon. They had no choice. He put his hand on the doorknob, his heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm. This was the turning point. He opened the door. Inside, the scene was the same as always. The soft lighting, the constant beep of the monitor, and the figure of John lying motionless in the bed. One of the brothers, playing his part to perfection. "Come in," Evans said, his voice leaving no room for argument. One by one, they entered the room, their presences filling the small space. He entered last, and then, with a deliberate movement, he closed the door. The click of the lock echoed in the tense silence, a definitive sound like a cell door closing. The trap was set. They were all here, the three guardians and the secret lying in the bed. Dr. Evans slowly turned to face the four people. His face, once a mask of professionalism, finally fell away. In its place emerged an expression of steel, and his eyes shone with the weight of the truth he now carried. "No procedure will be necessary," he said, his voice low and sharp, silencing the monitor's beep in their minds. "Because I already know there's nothing wrong with his brain. The charade is over. Now, you are going to tell me everything." Dr. Evans's sentence hung in the air, dense and irrevocable. For an instant, the only sound in room 208 was the constant beep of the heart monitor, an electronic pulse that suddenly sounded like a countdown. Panic spread across the faces of the three nurses. Jessica began to cry silently. Chloe seemed to have shrunk. But it was Sarah, the leader, who held Evans's gaze, her face a mask of defeat. The first crack in the deception, however, came from the bed. The man who should have been in a deep coma, the brother playing John that day, sat up abruptly. His eyes, identical to his brother's, were wide with fear. "It's over, Sarah," he said, his voice hoarse. "He knows. There's no point in lying anymore." That movement, that phrase, was the final confession. Sarah collapsed into a chair, the weight of months of lies crushing her. With a choked voice, she began to speak. She told everything. The night of the accident on the dark road, the panic when they realized they had run over a man. The shock of discovering the victim was a criminal fleeing a robbery, the paralyzing fear of prison, the terrible decision to hide the body, and the spiral of lies that followed. She explained how, upon hearing of the transfer of a patient in a coma for years, she conceived the most desperate plan of all, to use the system to hide her brother John from the law. The triplets, Arthur and David, agreed to take his place in shifts, driven by an unwavering fraternal love. They, the girlfriends, would use their positions in the hospital to protect the deception. It was an insane plan, born of love and fear, that worked perfectly until life itself betrayed them, with 3 unexpected pregnancies that drew the attention of the one man they couldn't deceive. As he listened, Evans looked at the 3 women, their hands instinctively resting on their bellies. He no longer saw only the perpetrators of a complex fraud. He saw a dysfunctional, terrified family who had made a terrible mistake and tried to fix it in the worst possible way. He saw 6 lives on the brink of ruin and 3 more that had not even begun. Cold, blind justice demanded that he pick up the phone and call the police, but the humanity in his heart screamed against it. He walked to the window and looked out at the lights of Chicago. He dealt with life and death every day. He knew that sometimes the rules needed to be bent so that the spirit could be saved. He turned around, the decision etched on his face. He picked up his cell phone. The group held their breath, expecting the sound of the siren. But Evans dialed a number from his contact list. "Ethan? It's me, Michael. I need you to come to St. Jude now. Bring your briefcase. It's a family consultation." He hung up and looked at the confused faces. "I'm not calling the police," he said. "I'm calling my lawyer." 20 minutes later, the door to room 208 opened again. A man entered identical to Dr. Evans in every respect, except for the expensive suit and an air of predatory confidence. The brothers' and nurses' jaws dropped. The irony of the situation was almost poetic. "Everyone, this is my twin brother, Ethan Evans," Michael announced. "He's the best defense attorney in the city, and from now on, he's your lawyer. Tell him every detail." The shock gave way to an overwhelming relief. Under Ethan's brilliant guidance, a new plan was devised, this time within the law. John would turn himself in, confessing to the concealment of the body, but not the homicide. Ethan argued brilliantly in court that the hit and run was a tragic accident, and that the panic of a young first-time offender, upon discovering the victim was a criminal, explained his irrational decision. With a clean record and Ethan's masterful defense, John's sentence was reduced to 2 years of community service. No one else was charged. The 6 lives that were on the brink of the abyss were given a second chance. A year later, in a sunny park in Chicago, the sound of babies laughing filled the air. 3 strollers were parked on the grass, and around them, the 3 brothers and the 3 young mothers celebrated their children's first birthday. From a nearby bench, Michael and Ethan Evans watched the scene. "You saved 9 lives that day, you know," Ethan said, adjusting his tie. Michael smiled, a genuine, serene smile. He had broken protocols and risked his career, but looking at that new, unlikely family, he knew he had made the only choice that mattered. He had chosen compassion over condemnation, and that was a diagnosis he would never regret. Did this story move you? Did it leave you breathless? If so, show your support by leaving a like on this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new stories. Now, I want to know your opinion in the comments. Did Dr. Evans do the right thing? And don't forget to tell me what city you're watching from. Turn on the notification bell to be the first to know when a new video is released, and explore our channel for more impactful stories like this one. Now I want to know your opinion in the comments. Did Dr. Evans do the right thing? Don't forget to tell me what city you're watching from, to be the first to know when a new video is released. And explore our channel for more impactful stories.